You have to understand something most people miss about empaths. They don't break loudly. There's no dramatic explosion, no clear warning sign that something has gone wrong. Instead, it happens slowly, almost invisibly beneath the surface. An empath can spend years absorbing the emotional weight of everyone around them, translating pain that isn't theirs, carrying burdens they never agreed to hold. And because they're wired to understand, to forgive, to rationalize behavior, they stay longer than they should. At first, it looks like strength. They're the calm one in chaos, the listener in every storm, the one who can sit with discomfort without flinching. But what most people don't realize is that this constant emotional processing comes at a cost. Every ignored boundary, every dismissed feeling, every moment where they chose someone else's peace over their own net accumulates. Not all at once, but steadily, quietly. And here's where the shift begins. The empath starts to notice a pattern. They give and it's expected. They understand and it's exploited. They forgive and it's repeated. What once felt like purpose begins to feel like depletion. The emotional bandwidth that used to feel endless starts narrowing. Conversations feel heavier. Interactions feel transactional. And for the first time, the empath doesn't just feel other people. They start feeling the weight of themselves. This is the internal conflict most never see because externally they still look composed. They still show up. They still listen. But internally something is changing. There's a growing tension between who they've always been and what they're starting to realize. And that realization is simple but unsettling. Being deeply understanding doesn't protect you from being deeply harmed. Now, psychologically, this is where overload turns into suppression. The empath doesn't suddenly lose their sensitivity. They start containing it. Instead of expressing hurt, they analyze it. Instead of reacting emotionally, they step back and observe. And while that might sound like growth, there's a critical difference between awareness and avoidance. Because what's happening here isn't healing, it's compression. Think of it like pressure building beneath the surface. Every unspoken frustration, every time they chose silence over confrontation, every moment they minimize their own it doesn't disappear. It gets stored, and over time, that emotional storage reaches capacity. This is the breaking point. Not a loud one, not a visible one, but a decisive one. It's the moment where the empath stops asking, "How can I understand them?" and starts asking, "Why am I tolerating this?" That shift in question changes everything because it redirects attention inward. It forces them to evaluate not just others' behavior but their own patterns of acceptance. And here's where it becomes dangerous, not for others but for the identity the empath has built around themselves, because once they see it, they can't unsee it. They recognize the imbalance. They see where they've been overextending, overgiving, over-explaining. And with that awareness comes a kind of emotional recoil, a pulling back, a need to protect what's been unprotected for too long. But protection, when it's born from prolonged exposure to harm, doesn't always come out balanced. It often comes out extreme. The same depth that allowed them to love intensely now allows them to withdraw completely. The same awareness that helped them connect now helps them detach. And the same emotional intelligence that made them compassionate can begin to make them calculating, because they're no longer just feeling emotions. They're managing them. This is the moment people describe as dark. But it's not darkness in the way most think. It's not evil. It's not malicious. It's the result of an empath reaching a threshold where continuing as they were is no longer sustainable. So they adapt. They become more selective, more guarded, less reactive. And while on the surface it may look like they've become cold, what's actually happened is far more complex. They've stopped allowing unrestricted access to their emotional world. And for those who were used to benefiting from that openness, this shift feels unsettling, even threatening. But from the empath's perspective, it's survival. The terrifying part isn't that the empath changes, it's that the change was necessary. And once that necessity is understood, there's no going back to who they used to be. Because the moment an empath realizes that their greatest strength has also been their greatest vulnerability is the moment they stop giving it away so freely. What happens next is even more unsettling because it's quieter and far more deliberate. After that internal breaking point, the empath doesn't announce a change. There's no confrontation, no dramatic declaration that something is different. In fact, to the outside world, it may look like nothing has changed at all. They're still present, still composed, still engaged in conversation. But if you pay close attention, there's a subtle shift in how they communicate. They stop explaining, and this is significant because explaining was once their default. Empaths naturally try to bridge gaps in understanding. They clarify intentions, soften conflicts, and translate emotions so that everyone else feels comfortable. They over-articulate not because they're unsure, but because they care. They want to be understood. And more importantly, they want others to feel understood. But over time, something becomes clear to them. Not everyone misunderstands you accidentally. Some people benefit from misunderstanding you. Some people rely on your explanations because it gives them room to avoid accountability. And once an empath recognizes that pattern, the value of explaining begins to collapse. So they stop, not out of pettiness, not out of anger, but out of awareness. Instead of trying to correct every misinterpretation, they let people reveal themselves. Instead of rushing to fill silence, they allow it to stretch. And in that silence, something interesting happens. People start saying more than they intend to. Without guidance, without emotional cushioning, others expose their assumptions, their motives, and their limitations. This is where the empath transitions from participant to observer. Now, psychologically, this is a powerful shift because observation creates distance and distance creates clarity. When you're no longer emotionally entangled in every interaction, you begin to see patterns you couldn't see before. You notice inconsistencies. You pick up on subtle manipulations. You recognize when someone's words don't align with their behavior. And for an empath, this realization is profound because their natural ability to read people doesn't disappear. It sharpens. But here's the key difference. They're no longer using that ability to connect. They're using it to evaluate. Every interaction becomes data. Every reaction is noted. They start asking quieter, more strategic questions. Is this person consistent? Do their actions match their words? What happens when I don't accommodate them? And perhaps most revealing of all, who are they when I stop making it easy for them? This is where the discomfort begins for others. Because the empath who once made conversation smooth, forgiving, and emotionally safe is no longer doing that work. They're no longer translating tension into understanding. They're allowing tension to exist. And most people don't know how to handle that. You'll see it in subtle ways. People become defensive. They ask, "Why are you being distant?" Or, "What's wrong?" But what they're really reacting to is the absence of something they relied on: the empath's willingness to carry emotional weight for both sides. Now, there's a philosophical layer to this that's worth understanding. When an empath stops explaining, they're not just changing behavior, they're redefining responsibility. They're no longer taking ownership of how others interpret them. They're no longer overfunctioning to maintain harmony. Instead, they're allowing people to sit with their own perceptions, even if those perceptions are flawed. And that can feel harsh, especially coming from someone who was once endlessly accommodating. But it's not harsh. It's accurate because true communication isn't about constant clarification. It's about mutual effort. And once the empath realizes that they've been carrying more than their share of that effort, the imbalance becomes impossible to ignore. So they recalibrate. They speak less but with more precision. They engage but with boundaries. They listen but without immediately absorbing. And most importantly, they stop trying to control how they're perceived. This is where their silence becomes powerful. Not passive silence, not avoidance, but intentional restraint. The kind that forces others to reveal their character without interference. The kind that removes emotional shortcuts and exposes what's actually there. And this is why the shift feels so unsettling to those around them. Because the empath is no longer predictable. They're no longer easy to read, easy to access, or easy to influence. There's a new layer of distance. One that isn't built from indifference, but from discernment. They're still aware, still perceptive, still capable of deep understanding. They've just decided not to offer it automatically. And that decision changes the entire dynamic. Because when an empath stops explaining, they stop negotiating their worth in every interaction. They stop justifying their boundaries. They stop shrinking their clarity to fit someone else's comfort. They let their presence speak for itself. And the people who were only comfortable with the version of them that over-explained, over-gave, and over-accommodated begin to fall away. Not because the empath pushed them out, but because for the first time the empath stopped pulling them in. And that's the moment everything becomes clear. Silence isn't the absence of communication, it's the removal of distortion. And after that period of silence and observation, something even more profound begins to take shape. Something that for many people is difficult to recognize at first because it doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't look like anger. It doesn't look like conflict. It looks like nothing. This is the phase where the empath who once felt everything so intensely begins to feel less. Not because they've healed completely and not because the